Okay, I want to quickly just put the practice vision in front of us so that we know where to look for that. If you're coming to practice here, you kind of know what the simple things are, just to sort of give us a compass, right? So, the main, while Sawyer puts up our practice vision here, sort of the main theme, if you will, of our practice vision, realizing the self without relationship to others, which includes everything. So we're talking about non-reliance, and we're talking about interconnectedness. Now, you look at those two things and go, they are not the same. How can we possibly intersect not being in a relationship with others and including everything? That's what gives this, I think, some juice, because that's an interesting intersection. So, without relationship to others, well, we're doing Zazen, we face the wall, so does the teacher, nobody's watching us, we're not practicing to make somebody else happy, to satisfy somebody else's yardstick, nobody's pulling us along, so we decide to get ourselves on the cushion, or in front of the Superbook, or whatever we're doing. There's nobody kind of forcing us to get here, so we're going to decide ourselves. We're going to come in and practice and do these four things. If it comes to Zazen, what are we doing with that time? Are we daydreaming? Are we writing stories? Are we making a shopping list? Or are we actually taking the posture, keeping the eyes open, breathing through the nose, and letting go of thought? What are we doing with that time? There's nobody to stop us from sleeping if we want to sleep, right? So there's no sort of relationship in that way. There's no us and them. There's no subject and object between people in the Zendo. If you want to look at this way, we're alone together, right? Everyone's alone doing their practice. No one can practice for anybody. So it kind of harkens back to Buddhist India, where the practitioners did not get together in one soto, in one room to practice. They were doing their practice in their individual hermitages. So they were alone together in their own kind of interesting way. Sawaki Roshi's students kind of did the same thing. So when he was traveling a lot, he was not always in the temple. When he was not there, students carried on, right? They were practicing without him, so they're carrying on their own, doing their own Sesshin practice, including Uchiyama Roshi, when he wasn't there. And so they weren't reliant on him in that way. He wasn't sort of driving them. So it's all about our own aspiration. Nobody's forcing us to practice. We make the time when this practice becomes important enough to us, we make the time to get into the Zendo or to get on the cushion. Sometimes people have been gone for a while, and then when they come back, they're very apologetic. Oh, Hoko, I'm so sorry, I haven't been here. Well, you had things to do in your life, and when this becomes important, you'll be here. Okay, so that's the one piece. The other piece is, well, it includes everything. So, this self that includes everything. So, of course, this comes from Sawaki Roshi's understanding of Dogen's teachings about this universal functioning. Sometimes you call it Jiju Yutsamai. So this is where we get the teachings like Zazen is the self doing itself by itself. There's this universal thing. Or Uchiyama Roshi says your whole life is the self doing the self by itself. It's not just Zazen. It's everything we're doing. So in Zazen, there is no separation between self and others, or between subject and object. During Sesshin, one of the things we often hear and that we have to keep in mind is from the very first opening bell all the way to the last bell on the last day, this is one continuous period of Zazen. So although this may go for 7 days, we may sit for, and we're eating meals and we're using the bathroom and we're sleeping at night. And yet the way we approach that is there is only one period of Zazen from the very beginning to the very end. It includes everything. That means we can also see our whole lives that way. So we can, when we're done with Sesshin, we go back out into the world, we can still see our whole lives as one continuous period of practice or Zazen. So this self is the one, the self in this kind of including everything is the one where we wake up from this daydream of I as a kind of separate being disconnected from everything, right? And we see the larger picture. So from the point of view of the self that includes everything, there is no relationship with others because there are no separate beings with whom we can have a relationship. Everything is one piece. And if everything's one piece, then that self and other, that subject and object has to drop away. So we see this intersection here. It's not that we stop existing in this form as karmic beings with names and characteristics and likes and dislikes and all that stuff. It's not that we have to cut off relationships or contacts with our family or friends. This can sound kind of scary. If we arrive and we see, the first thing we see in the practice vision is, whoa, we can't have any relations with other people? it feels like a cult, man. You know, go in the Zendo and shut the door, and it's like you gotta, you know, no, we're not saying we can't have friends and family, and right, not what this is about. Not that kind of, not that kind of thing. So if there's only this one unified reality, then there are not things that we can separate out and categorize and label, right, and judge. Yeah, there's only this one piece. So if we look at the practice vision, and I did not put the whole diagram in your handout, I just sort of gave you the categories. We can see that we have an inside piece and an outside piece, right? So there's the inside, what I'm calling the inside the temple piece, which is about lineage and legacy and what did we inherit from our very particular 20th century ancestors. And we come down to 4 main activities. Zazen, everyone knows what Zazen is. Work practice, which is not the same as volunteer work. Work is, you know, everything from, you know, cleaning the building and growing the food to washing the dishes and, yeah, work practice. Study, in this case, usually it's Dharma study, we're studying a text, something like that, and ritual. So these 4 things, Zazen, work, study, and ritual, are our main activities. Everything is going to derive from or be a part of those 4 umbrellas, right? So ritual being not only the forms, the simple forms we use, but also ceremonies, activities that some of them are going to happen every morning, some of them happen once a year, but all of that sort of ritualized, deportment-specific behavior. So those are the 4 things very quickly that we concentrate on, what I'm calling sort of inside the temple. It doesn't mean we don't do work practice outside or we don't sit at home. It just means that's kind of where those things live. Then we've got this outside piece, which is the outward facing. And I have to say at this moment, the outward facing piece is not as highly developed as the internal piece because this thing is always a work in progress. But we've got 4 areas that I want to focus on for the outward facing Sangha and society kind of piece. One is environmental. We not only do we happen to have several subject matter experts within the Sangha that help us practice with the environment, but we know from last week, looking at the kind of social activities from Soto, environment was one of them, right? That was a big piece. So for us here, it's not so much about sort of being an activist in the world, although you could be. There are things we can do here to simply be good stewards of the land and the resources that we have. So we're looking in this year of tangible thusness at things like how do we grow food, how do we make best use of those resources, you know, what are we doing with our own grounds, are we wasting water, are we, right? So there's all of those things. There's lots of larger teachings in there that we can look at about coming from Dogen, you know, how do we understand nature? How do we interact with nature? What are the teachings that we have, right, that from all of those studies? So for instance, if we look at Todo-san's book on mountains and waters, we have opportunities to dig into that, like for years. The second one here is ethics. This is where precepts fall. So those that are making Raksu and about to take precepts this year, for instance, this is where our study of precepts, morality, all of that happens, right? It just simply means we have some responsibility in the world to other beings. That can look like a lot of stuff. So it can be precepts, but it can be other kinds of things, right? It might not be the 16 precepts directly, but just how are we in the world? We're not in isolation. What we do affects other beings, and like, what does that look like? So you quickly see how these 4 things are actually not separate from each other, because how is that separate from environment in some ways? Third one is human relationships. I put that in there because I think putting some attention on specifically human relationships, because we have relationships in the environment, right? We have a way to address those. When we're looking at things like what we're calling the loneliness epidemic, when we're looking at just angst, suffering in the world, but it can also be our family relationships. How are we treating our parents and children and bosses and neighbors, and just all of that is a really fruitful ground for practice. So again, in many ways tied with the ethical piece. If we look at precepts like, you know, not engaging in sexual greed, not being angry, all that stuff, really there's lots to work with there. Finally, the last one, creativity. That started life, when I created that section, it started life as Buddhist material culture. And I got pushback from my peers, from my mentors, my mentor teachers saying, what is that? Now, where I was going with that was, we have, I don't know, artifacts. It's useful to know, like, why do our altars look like they look, and why do our robes look like they look, and there's also things like Baika singing and Buddhist poetry, and, you know, Toto-san wrote a whole book about ryokan, and there's a place for that. So I haven't fully sort of explored that. There's a page for each of these things on Sanshin Source, but I think there's a ton of practice that can go there. And the trap with creativity is that we really want that to be an expression of ego. I want to do painting in order to express my ego, or I want to do dancing, or I want to do singing, or, you know, make things or whatever, as an expression of my ego. And so I think our practice opportunity there is really kind of subtle, right? Like, what are we doing? What are we expressing? I've not fully gotten down to the bottom of that one yet, to really know, like, where we could go with that, but I think there's a ton of opportunity. So we can start by looking at the things that exist, the painting, the poems, the artifacts, right, the things that exist. And then I just think there's tons of interesting conversations that can happen there. Yeah, there's just all the do's, all the ways can fall in there. And of course, they, you know, a lot of that doesn't fall into any one category. It just kind of, you know, there's a finger in all of them, right? So I'm really excited about that piece, because I think we're going to do some stuff that nobody's done before here. Like, right? I just think there's some really interesting, juicy intersections there. If I could just free up the time to start fleshing that out. So what I've started with on the practice vision in the last year, this year, and probably next year, is to really dig down into the internal piece, the Zazen work study ritual, so that we really, really understand the practice we've inherited from our 20th century ancestors. So we're really quite confident and very stable and mature about what we're doing. And then I think we take that and push it out and say, what does that look like under this Sangha and society, right? If we're really solidly practicing, what does that look like in the world? That could be super cool. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that can manifest, right? So that was a very quick tour. And let me just say, please, as you're sort of thinking about where you want to get your feet wet in this practice and where you want to engage and how you want to connect, go out to Sanshin Source, spend some time with this chart. It's linked. You can see all the underlines there. It's linked to whatever we already know about pieces of the practice vision. Like under ethics, there is a big section there about precepts. If you're headed for precepts, it'd be good to look that over, right? And all of these things are going to continue to grow. So Sanshin Source has grown exponentially since I started it, I'm happy to say. It's a place to collect stuff, and it doesn't have to be stuff from me, right? If we have other teachers doing things and other resources to add, let's do that. And let me just say too, as a part of that Sanshin Source, the section in Source that's coming out of this 6-week discussion will live beyond this series. So Sawyer's got a page for Buddhist Essentials on the main site, which is about the logistics and that's where the handouts are and all of that. But within, thank you, you're going to show people Buddhist Essentials. This thing is going to live beyond, because I really want to continue to collect resources and content. Some of what needs to go up there is questions that have come from these discussions that I've not yet had a chance to get resources together for. So that's all going to continue to grow. Please check back. Because the recordings from here are going to go up there, but also just as I create things, encounter things, that's all going to continue to grow. And I hope that this sort of becomes a backbone, because we know these 18 things we've talked about over these 6 weeks are all the really important stuff, like we at least need to know about. So this feels like it could form a really useful backbone to digging into important parts of our practice. So this thing will not go away. Please continue to engage with it. And as you do that, if you come across resources, you have questions, we're going to continue to grow that collection.